I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, with distrust of their own leadership and many leading international organizations, who really represents the Palestinian people? Our digital producer, Malika Bilal, is here looking out for your live feedback. Malika, I love the question for today because it's so thought-provoking, and Palestine is such a fractionalized area.
It is. And members of the stream team were at the Russell Tribunal, which we'll discuss a little bit later in the show. And we spoke to activists there and got a few video comments that we'll share during the show, and it's exactly on that question. But for those of you at home, if you'd like to join this conversation, tweet us with the hashtag AJStream.
All right, sitting between Malika and me is journalist and blogger Layla El-Haddad. She's a Palestinian and the author of the award-winning blog Gaza Mom. Layla, welcome to the stream.
Thank you.
Actually, I should say welcome back. She's been with us before. This show relies on the participation, of course, of our community, and there are all kinds of ways that you can be part of it. One is Google+. These folks added the stream to their circles, so in just a few minutes we'll be hearing their thoughts. But for now, here are some of the hashtags that they've been following. This weekend in New York, the Russell Tribunal on Palestine convened for the fourth and final time. Its goal is to hold third parties, primarily the U.S. and the UN, accountable for alleged Israeli violations of international law. Now, although the tribunal holds no legal status, it is viewed as a symbolic people's trial to prevent the crime, as they call it, of silence. Here's a look at past sessions.
The Russell Tribunal on Palestine is one of the most important events that I can think of over the last 50 or so years.
The man from Gaza was killed, and they arrested this man for 2 years.
It is a way for us to sit together and to bring to the consciousness and the notice of the world what has been done to the Palestinian people over the last 60-something years.
It was the ethnic cleansing of my people in 1948.
They built 9 settlements in the middle of the Palestinian populated areas around East Jerusalem.
I think this is the crucial moment. This is the moment when such tribunals should sit and make decisions.
While many Palestinians agree that the UN and the U.S. are complicit in allowing Israel to commit alleged human rights violations, they also point the finger at their own leadership. Recently, Palestinians have taken to the streets in the West Bank, protesting the Palestinian Authority's inability to pay its employees their full salaries as the price of living goes up. Meanwhile, in Hamas-controlled Gaza, hundreds called for the removal of the Islamist group for its inability to curtail daily power outages that have led to the deaths of numerous children from home fires. So where does this leave the Palestinian people? Joining us live via Skype from New York City is Frank Barat. He's the coordinator of the Russell Tribunal on Palestine. He's been involved with all 4 sessions that have taken place. Frank, welcome to the stream.
Hi, glad to be with you, and very happy to be with Layla, actually. I'm one of the 12,000 followers, Layla, and to be with a young Palestinian woman, I think that represents both the present and the future is an honor.
Well said. Hey, Frank, what I'd love for you to do is explain to people who aren't that familiar with it what the Russell Tribunal is and what its objectives are.
Okay, the Russell Tribunal is not looking, and that has to be made clear, at Israeli violations of international law. We're not judging, we're not asking the question, is Israel guilty or not? Because we already know the answer. Israel has been proven guilty by very respected bodies all around the world. So Israel is guilty. What we are trying to explain and examine is if Israel is the bank robber, who enables the bank robbery to happen? So who provides the getaway car, who provides the diplomatic cover, who provides the weapons. And so we're looking at our own countries. I'm French, I'm European, so I'm looking at France, at Europe. I live in London, I'm looking at the UK as well. We've looked at the US and the UN. Who are the enablers? Israel couldn't do what it does without US support, UN and EU diplomatic cover. So that's the main goal of the tribunal.
Well, Frank, there's a question here on Twitter directed at you. This is from Skelly, who says, who is the Russell Tribunal reaching that's not already involved in advocating for and supportive of Palestinian rights?
Okay, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, one of our goal at the start of the tribunal was to sort of break the wall of silence and try to reach mainstream opinion. We obviously want to be, surrounded by activists and friends, but we try to actually, reach mainstream opinion, mainly by having in our jury people like Angela Davis, Alice Walker, Dennis Banks, Roger Waters, that we thought the media might grab onto and be interested in. On this side, this hasn't been a major success, but we slowly realized that we can do without governments and we can do without the mainstream media. I mean, thanks to bloggers like Layla and others, we are slowly not going to be, not going to need any CNN or BBC any longer. So,
but we'll always need Al Jazeera.
Right?
But we'll always need Al Jazeera.
Yeah, of course.
Hey, Layla, I do want to bring you in on this. I mean, what's going on at the Russell Tribunal is purely symbolic. But do you think, even though it is symbolic, it can possibly lead to political change, real change?
I mean, it definitely forms part of this larger global movement intended to challenge Israeli impunity, Israeli crimes, and so forth, U.S. complicity, UN complicity. And in that regard, if we take it in context, then it is very valuable in informing people. And of course, the original mission of the first Russell Tribunal was that it is meant to, I believe it was Bertrand Russell said, we are not judges, we are witnesses. And this is an effort to make mankind bear witness to these crimes and humanity. So if you understand it from that perspective, it is very valuable in providing this sort of platform for advocates of the Palestinian cause.
Frank, I'm curious, what's the official position that the Russell Tribunal jury takes toward Hamas and the ruling of Gaza?
I mean, we don't take any official position, Hamas and Gaza, and we don't take any position, at least as the tribunal, on Fatah. We don't take any position on the UN statehood bid, because this is once again not our role. We are looking into our own government's complicities and our own corporation complicities. So we're not taking any position on sort of internal Palestinian matters. I mean, if you ask my personal point of view, it's a different thing, but the tribunal itself doesn't take any position on that.
Well, I'd like to go to our Google Plus Hangout and get one of the members in on this discussion, Atta Hindi. I'd like your thoughts on if there's an honest broker in all this, and if so, who could that be?
On my end, I would probably say that there's no need to search for an honest broker anymore, that we don't have one. You have a unique situation where the UN, an organization composed of states, is actually a member of this so-called quartet. In my opinion, the only possible way for us to move forward is to make our rightful claims under international human rights and humanitarian law, and without hesitation. If we don't, we remain the biggest blockade to peace and justice. We could have observer status at the UN General Assembly. We don't, even though we have the votes. The fact that the US, Israel, and even the EU has thrown all their weight to stop this effort shows that we are the ones that would gain from the situation. We must take advantage of the truth, and the truth is that we are a state under foreign occupation. We could become a state party to the Rome Statute of the ICC, but we're not. We could accede to numerous international treaties and conventions, but we have not. We have a unique opportunity for achieving justice for the first time in 60 years, and over 60 years. And the only way to deal with criminals and criminal activity is through the law. And unless the Palestinian Authority decides that they will represent their people and their people's interests in pursuing justice, we will never achieve that sort of justice.
So, Layla, if the Palestinians can't rely on the US or the UN or the EU or even their own leaders, who do they rely on?
They rely on themselves, and it bears reminding that the Palestinian struggle and the Palestinian popular resistance has been around for 130 years, and the fact that Palestinians themselves continue to exist is in and of itself evidence that that the struggle is ongoing, that that in of itself is a form of resistance. And so that's where organizations like this come in, where platforms like the Russell Tribunal, where the global boycott, divestment, sanctions movement in conjunction with local popular resistance come in, is to fill these gaps where Palestinian leadership is failing, I think.
I'd like to go to our Google Plus Hangout with that same question that's being raised, and I want to go to Adam Akkad. Your thoughts on that? Who's representing the Palestinian people?
Well, I think there are a lot of groups and bodies who like to claim that they represent the Palestinian people, but I don't think that there is a single body that does with any legitimacy. I think that the Palestinian Authority, for example, actually has become one of the biggest impediments to the resistance movement, and has serves as a collaborationist entity with the essentially an extension of Israel and its occupation. And the common ground between the Palestinian Authority and Israel is their acceptance and desire to maintain the current stalemate and status quo between the parties, which involves containing and limiting the Palestinian self-determination and the desires of the people.
Frank, I know you want to jump in here.
Yeah, I think talking about broker, honest broker, is wrong. Actually, we do. It's part of that. We do have to change our vocabulary because broker implies again this two parties thing. You know, broker implies you have to talk and someone has to sit between you, has to help you make a deal. And as Leila was saying, we don't need the Palestinians don't need a broker. It's a struggle against colonialism and Zionism. You know, you don't need a broker. You need popular resistance. And I do agree that the people will speak for themselves, and will actually eventually come to a victory. Talking about broker is misleading, and it fulfilled this two states, this 50-50 type of narrative that we've heard for too long now.
Lina Al-Safin, coming to us from Ramallah, I want to bring you into this discussion. You know, if the resistance was effective in its current form, I would think we would see more progress and more positivity coming from the Palestinians at this point. What's your view on the ground? I mean, what is it going to take to get somebody to act as a unifying voice and to really be able to lead and strategize and mobilize the Palestinians?
Well, that's exactly what's missing from the ground right now. There is no effort to mobilize or strategize or to even bring the Palestinians out to protest. There's a lack of a national resistance strategy. And that is due to a number of factors, such as the dependency on foreign aid, the plethora of NGOs in the West Bank, and also the current popular resistance movement. I've already voiced my opinions about that, and I'm not a big fan. But you only have to look at it from the view that in the 7 years, if you want to count since Belain's first protest, in the 7 years that the first protest from Belain started off, there hasn't been a proper or like a better reception from the rest of the Palestinians to this so-called popular resistance, and that I believe is due to the large number of international and Israeli activists who are involved in these state protests.
Well, Leila, I want to get back to this issue of who represents who. There's a Facebook comment from Noel who says, the point in its entirety is that nobody speaks for the Palestinian people. The UN should, but they're too busy still playing their Cold War era politics. And that leads us to a video comment from Remy, who was at the Russell Tribunal this weekend. Have a listen.
I mean, when you're talking about the PLO or the PA, I mean, these aren't bodies that represent me. I see myself as part of a global sector of Palestinian civil society. We aren't a monolith, we're dynamic, but I think that fundamentally we need to be fighting for our rights, fighting for the end of occupation, apartheid, fighting for the right of return for Palestinian refugees, fighting for equality for all people from the river to the sea.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I was going to ask that same question earlier, is when we're talking about Palestinians, who are we talking about? Because there's this common misunderstanding that we're referring to Palestinians on the ground in the occupied Palestinian territories, when more than half of the Palestinian population lives outside of the OPT, of course, within Israel, within refugee camps and diaspora abroad generally. And what's really needed, I think, is a more comprehensive representative mechanism or organization to speak on their behalf. There needs to be, universal Palestinian elections, if you will, where the current elections or the past elections only allowed those inside the OPT to vote. And that is, of course, based on the now, we could say, defunct Oslo Accords.
Lina, do you sense any sort of indication of a ground swelling there, or do you sense more perhaps apathy and despair and people feeling like we've been down this road many, many times and it's not getting us anywhere?
Definitely what you said, just the last part right there. There's been, Palestinian society now is so fragmented. It's really hard to actually unify the people to motivate them into taking the resistance back into their own hands. And that again stems from the fact that the PA and the PLO, they do not represent the Palestinian people as they claim, and we seem to forget that. For example, there are 1.5 million Palestinians living in what is called Israel. They are not represented by any Palestinian body. There are 6 million refugees around the world and others in the diaspora. They are also not represented, despite what the PLO said during its charter in the 1980s. And then even the Palestinians in the occupied territories, the West Bank and Gaza Strip, even though I do view the 48 territories as occupied territory as well, they are not also fully represented by the PA. For example, the PA does not represent me, neither does Hamas, neither does Fatah. So there is this kind of vacuum of who represents the Palestinian people, definitely.
Well, Adam, I know you want to get in on this. Adam Akkad in Google+. It looks like your microphone might be muted.
Sorry, is it better now?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to say that I think the consequences of the status quo just stem from the role of the Palestinian Authority in maintaining this colonial reality on the ground. And part of that is, Israel is really smart. Instead of maintaining its own occupation, they put up a familiar face to run its occupation for it, and the Palestinian people, especially in the West Bank, now live in the illusion of their own self-determination, their own leadership, their own governance, when that is far from the case. And a lot of it is dressed up under this, what the PA calls security coordination with Israel, which is basically maintaining the safety and security of the Israeli people while keeping the Palestinians subject to this brutal occupation and apartheid policies. So I think in order to move beyond, to return to the resistance, we have to move away from this Oslo framework and reestablish what our resistance movement hopes to do.
So Adam, now what? If the current movement isn't working, what's the role for international activists at this point?
Well, I think international activists, they play an important role. I think solidarity is important, but I also think understanding what solidarity means is more important. I think solidarity activists need to understand that the struggle and the resistance needs to be led by Palestinians, and that the resistance should be defined by Palestinians, and the solidarity stance should be one of support simply for what the Palestinian people desire. And I think that in the future, the way I see it, we're going to have... So currently the Palestinian Authority is dressing up the crisis as a financial crisis, that we don't have money, people need to get paid, when in reality that's only a symptom of the political situation on the ground. Mm-hmm. So I think the Palestinian people are going to start to realize that the self-defeating peace process is fruitless and will eventually take a rights-based approach in terms of the struggle, the resistance.
And I think that's where efforts like the Russell Tribunal can be helpful, is in, again, reframing the struggle as one of rights and not real estate. Mm-hmm. There's this, common refrain that this is, really an issue of land, and all we have to do is figure out, find the broker and divvy it up, and things will be okay. When, as Frank and others have mentioned, that needs to be debunked. The solution is clear. The problems are identified. We need to find a way to remove those impediments, and again, identifying those complicit and figuring out how to remove those obstacles by way of the global movement like BDS. That's what it does, is it can hold Israel accountable for its crimes and begin to put pressure on it and begin to do something real in a very practical sense where other methods may have failed on the ground.
And Frank, is it that practical sense that that's what the tribunal is trying to do? There's a question here on Twitter from Nafizi who says, the Russell Tribunal is a key indicator of how bleak the future looks for the plight of Palestinians in their quest for a state. Would you agree with that?
Well, is that question directed to me?
Yes. A tweet saying that the tribunal is a key indicator of how bleak the future really looks.
Yeah, but I'm not sure what bleak means in this occasion. Is the tribunal bleak? Was the session bleak? Were the speakers bleak? I
think it's more directed toward the plight of Palestinians.
Anyway.
You know what, Frank?
Sorry, I'll continue on that. Actually, I think it's completely the opposite. The tribunal has gone for about 4 years now. We've traveled to Spain, to Cape Town, to the UK, and now to the US. And every time we've seen people get together. You know, in the venue at the Great Hall at Cooper Union, you had about 800 people coming from Ireland, from France, from Palestine, the old Palestine, Gaza, but also diaspora. You had union leaders. So it brought people together, and that's one of the aspects of the tribunal that people that haven't experienced it don't know about. It really brings people together. Then on Saturday evening, you get meetings with Palestinians that haven't seen each other for years. You get meetings from activists that only knew each other by emails. So it's really sort of build bridges and put a face to an email name, and it sort of reinforce our friendship and our solidarity movement. And that's one of the main aspects of the tribunal as well. But yeah.
Lena, is there a certain group in which you see hope for the Palestinians? In terms of where things may be emerging?
It's still too early to tell. But I just want to touch upon something that Frank was talking about. If the whole point of the Russell Tribunal is to bring about awareness and to hold Israel accountable for all of its crimes that it has committed across the space of 64 years against the Palestinian people, then why? Well, should the Palestinian people themselves be excluded from this process? Because for me, there's a disconnect between the Palestinians under occupation and the Russell Tribunal, since it does not address them, or nor does it actually bring in their voices of, to share their voices and their own experiences under occupation. And I'm not talking about the Western-educated intellectual Palestinians, but rather the people such as the Bedouins living in the South Hebron.
Lena, we're going to have to allow Frank to answer that question in our online post show. So we're going to continue this conversation there. But first, we want to take the last minute or so to get to Malika with some other leads we're following.
An online ad calling attention to the lack of clean water in Haiti has sparked a heated debate about privilege and power. The ad for the charity Water is Life takes aim at the popular hashtag First World Problems and attempts to show that many so-called problems in the West are minor compared to everyday issues faced in developing nations. Take a look.
I hate when my phone charger won't reach my bed. I hate when my leather seats aren't heated.
When I go to the bathroom and I forget my phone.
Le mette radio dans machine à laver, yo commence à sentir.
I hate it when my house is so big. I need 2 wireless washers.
The video ends with the message, first world problems are not problems. That's a message that resonated with some, but others took issue with the campaign. It's very disturbing and seems condescending to the Haitians in the video, Akila tweets. And some, like Fain on Twitter, say the ad missed the point, as the hashtag was meant to be satirical. Our next lead's out of the US, where hip-hop artist Lupe Fiasco has launched an online campaign protesting the outcome of a lawsuit involving a Native American tribe. A U.S. federal court dismissed the suit by the Ogallala Sioux tribe against 4 U.S. beer companies. The suit was aimed at stopping the flow of millions of cans of beer into the tribe's reservation. Lupe responded, asking netizens to post pictures of themselves toasting to the Pine Ridge Reservation with a glass of water. I propose a toast to Pine Ridge as a show of visual support to the victims of alcohol-related abuse on the reservation and beyond. Web users did just that, using the hashtag more than 1,000 times as they tweeted and Instagrammed images in support of the tribe. We'll talk about challenges facing Native Americans on Tuesday's show, so tweet us your thoughts at hashtag AJStream. Lisa?
All right, stay with us because the post show is next. It's streamed at aljazeera.com. Now, tomorrow's program, has the U.S. government done enough to reconcile injustices committed against Native American tribes? We'll ask James Anaya, the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of indigenous people. And until then, we'll see you online. Welcome to the Streams Post Show. We're still discussing Palestinian representation. With us in studio is Layla El-Haddad. She's a Palestinian author and journalist. With us remotely is Frank Barat. He's the coordinator of the Russell Tribunal on Palestine. And when we ended the main show, Lina Al-Safin from Ramallah, if you would just summarize the question that you had for Frank so we can allow him to answer. I think you have to unmute yourself as well, Lina. Thanks.
Yeah.
Great.
Sorry. If the point of the Russell Tribunal is to bring accountability to Israel, how can it, on behalf of the Palestinian people, how can it do so while excluding the Palestinians themselves from this initiative?
Frank?
Yeah. Hi, Lina. I really liked your piece, by the way, about popular resistance a couple of months ago. Anyway, to get back to your question, that's not the point of the tribunal. That's what I explained at the beginning. We're not here to address Israeli violations of international law. Because they're very well known, we're here to address our own government's complicity in Israeli occupation and colonization of Palestine. And our topics vary from one session to another. In Cape Town, we actually had 8 Palestinians because in Cape Town we talked about apartheid, but not in the context of what John Dugard would say, so the apartheid inside the occupied territories. We're talking about apartheid against the whole Palestinian people. We had Jazi Abu Kaf from the Bedouins, we had Jamal Juma, we had Mahmoud Hassan, we had Rafi Ziada, Shawan Jabalin, so a lot of Palestinians from 48, from the occupied territories, from the diaspora, because we addressed the apartheid analogy. In New York, we're addressing UN and US complicity. So we have former delegates of the UN. We have people that have worked, in the US, in the US departments, etc. So it just depends on the topic. But the main point is we are here to look at ourselves, at our own governments. So that's the point. We never said we're talking on behalf of the Palestinians. We're just here to, inshallah, help them in the struggle.
Layla, you're a writer, you're a blogger. Do you see the battlefront shifting at all to the online sphere?
Definitely. In fact, I think that's sort of the next stage, if you will, for Palestinian resistance beyond the global solidarity stage, which plays a very important role. And I'm glad Frank mentioned those points because we often fail to recognize the extent to which the United States is complicit. It almost seems like we're falling into this trap of blaming them for everything, but really we do. I'll get back to your point about the online, but really do have to recognize the extent to which they have enabled Israeli crimes, the extent to which they have only served to entrench Israeli settler colonialism and occupation, by way of unlimited financial, diplomatic, and military support. We really do have to recognize that being one of the major differences between this conflict and many, many others, including the South African conflict and apartheid, that being one of the major obstacles. And that's where I think something like the Russell Tribunal plays an important part in informing people about this. And we really do have to keep mentioning that. But yes, definitely, I think, it's been slow, I think, to materialize since the days when I first started blogging in 2004 till today. I had hoped there would be a faster and a more dominant Palestinian presence online. Not to say that there isn't, but when compared with other regional players, it's not as strong.
But it's evolving?
Definitely. I mean, when I was last in Gaza in 2010, I was approached by one Palestinian blogger on Twitter, and he said a bunch of bloggers and wanted to meet with me, and I was shocked. There was 12 different bloggers, and some of them continue to blog, some don't. Most of them were women. A lot of people asked me that question, and I was very excited about that because we do need to hear these voices. And I think often the situation can really press down on you when you're there and you feel like you're not able to do anything about it, and what are you contributing by blogging? But it's really quite dramatic, the amount, your ability to sort of influence public opinion, I think, abroad through just normal everyday blogs about what your life might be like, really do play even probably a more important role than any of these politicians or organizations are playing, I would say.
Well, you mentioned something that's resonating with our community. Yeah. Did you have a follow-up?
I was just going to say one more thing on that, is that, I think there is this recognition amongst Palestinian parties, amongst Palestinians, that you can, homemade rockets and whatnot can only do so much, whatever you think about them, the enshrined right of Palestinians to self-defense, but you can only do so much with rockets, but you can do a whole lot more, I think, from your living room on your computer in a besieged home, whether in Gaza or the West Bank or in a refugee camp in Lebanon. So
and it's that exact point of doing more on your computer that's resonating. This is from Peter. He says, good dialogue, but modern governance structure is still stuck in the 19th century modalities. People and social media will be the change.
Yes.
With that, I'd like to go to our Google Plus Hangout because Atta has a follow-up. Atta, go ahead.
I mean, while I may personally agree with a few of the criticisms, I would nevertheless like to say that, I mean, the fact that there is a mechanism to be able to highlight the crimes that are committed and complicity with those crimes, I think is a positive step, no matter how little it may be. I mean, this all contributes to a greater cause. On the other hand, I'd like to go back to, I mean, I guess the main question in terms of representation. I personally, as a citizen, I have no problem with a government that says that it can represent me, as long as I have voted for that government. And as it stands now, the government that exists does not represent the Palestinian people. And I'd like to add on to exactly what Lena said, not only for the people in the West Bank and Gaza who have the ability to vote, but also for refugees and people that are living within 1967 Israel.
Frank, I'm curious, have you noticed a shift in rhetoric or a shift in thinking within, the UN and the US maybe even regarding Palestine and Israel?
So if I think there's going to be a shift in the UN or in the US?
Have you heard a shift in the rhetoric?
I haven't really. I mean, words are just words. So the US doesn't. I mean, the US is getting worse and worse. I mean, the UN does sometimes, get some pretty good statements, but it's just words. And I think to go back to Adam's point, talking about representativity and our governments, I do think we have to globalize, and to open another question. Do I feel represented by the French government? I don't. Do I feel represented by the EU, whatever constitution? I don't. So I think the main question should be, are governments, all around the world representative of us? And do we need them? Look at the Arab revolts in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya, and the rest. The governments were made irrelevant. Both Western governments that one day were supporting Mubarak, the next day were not supporting him, the next day were not sure to supporting him. The people took over, and governments were scared of that, and they just completely. They were made irrelevant. The people said, look, we're going to do what we're going to do. We're going to take Mubarak out of power, and they did it. And no one could do anything about it. And I think that's going to happen all over the world. It's not a question. Palestine needs to be understood as a globalized, a global situation. What happens in Greece, what happens in Spain at the moment, it's going to happen. It's going to come to, even if people still feel comfortable in the UK or in Ireland, it's going to happen to us. And we're going to have to do the same. But we're more, there's more of us than them. We're 99%, they're 1%. So I'm pretty confident.
Lena, I want to pick up on something that was just mentioned. Frank said that governments are being made irrelevant. That's something that was echoed by a member of our community. This is a video comment from Ben White, who was at the tribunal. Have a listen to this.
Civil society groups have in many ways taken the lead. That in some respects you might think should be actually the responsibility of political groups. And hopefully there's going to be developments in the near future whereby political leadership kind of catches up with the discourse and strategies that have long been put forward by civil society-based groups.
Lena, do you see that happening? Are civil society-based groups taking the lead?
Well, there are definitely a number of youth groups in Palestine that are taking to the streets and addressing issues that the PA are violating, such as the political arrests, and also these groups. They've actually caught the attention of of the politicians and of the political parties, who obviously they want to co-opt them by extending an arm to sit down with them so they can know what direction they're going in. But at the same time, there's still a huge, an immense load of fear for the PA that restricts people from speaking out and from actually exercising their right to protest.
All right, Layla, Frank, everyone in our Google Hangout, thank you so much for joining us on today's show. That's going to end our conversation. Now, on tomorrow's program, has the U.S. government done enough to reconcile injustices committed against Native American tribes? We'll ask James Anaya, the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of indigenous people. Tweet us your questions and comments, and until tomorrow, we'll see you online.